Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I will flip in here, and he wants to know if he gets really strong at the push press, will it develop all three heads of his triceps effectively? So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. This is a great question because a lot of people really underrate the push press who aren't from the strength and conditioning world for the wide variety of things that it can do for you. Now, when it comes to the triceps, we need to talk just a little bit about the anatomy of the triceps, because most of you guys know the triceps have three heads, right? That's why it's called tricep. Tri meaning three. You've got the lateral head right here, got the medial head here, and then you got the long head up here, this big one that runs up the back. Now, for most people, the long head is the one that gets most neglected because most of your chest presses, I don't care whether it's a closed grip bench press, a dumbbell incline press, bench press, whatever it is you're doing, the medial and lateral heads do most of the work. And, you know, people want to argue a lot about whether certain heads of a muscle can get underdeveloped or not. And, you know, generally if you're doing enough big, heavy movements, a wide variety of movements, odds you're going to have underdeveloped heads is smaller, but it still does happen. It can absolutely happen because certain heads of muscle perform different functions sometimes. Something like the bicep, not so much. People who worry about this with the bicep, it's not complex enough of a muscle that's ever a concern. The tricep, though, has two different major functions regarding individual heads. Since shoulder rotation and stretch is part of the function of the long head, and the normal pressing forward is what the lateral and medial heads do, it is possible to get a basically imbalanced tricep. It absolutely can happen. You know, just like things like upper and lower chest, they can actually become disproportionate. It is possible. These things can happen. Again, big point of argument out there, but on this one, the bodybuilders might actually be right. The bros might be right on this. Different heads of muscles can become slightly more developed than others. Now, with the long head, normally to really activate the long head, you need to get something with a stretch in it. But interestingly enough, you don't have to do that with isolation movements. It's generally easiest to do with isolation movements because there aren't that many compounds that actually work the long head as effectively. And since most of the compounds work the other two heads that people think of as exercises that at least use the tricep to a large extent, generally people who isolate wouldn't want to do exercises that focus on the lateral and medial head, meaning keeping your elbows into the side and doing this with some sort of press down. Not ideal because there's no shoulder extension, and that's what you need to get that stretch on the long head. So you wouldn't want to do those things, and why people do them is beyond me. You know, if they're doing enough pressing, that shouldn't be an issue. They shouldn't need those variations. But the other becomes useful. Now, the interesting thing is, with the long head, when you're pressing over your head, there is more recruitment of the long head. All right, there is more recruitment of the long head going on. So the push press, just like any other overhead press, does have the potential to develop the long head to a larger extent than other presses. The other thing you've got to look at there is the eccentric loading portion of a push press. And now I've said in the past, eccentrics are not necessary for muscle growth. People who say they're important for muscle growth, that's a lie. It's not true. Are they a potentially useful tool? Yes, but you can do completely eccentric free training, meaning you can do training that does zero negatives. I mean zero negatives. I mean exercises to where you push the weight up over your head and drop it in front of you. You could just do that on every rep and have to re-pick it up with a rack or a machine. You could do pen lay rows where you turn loose at the top. You do deadlifts where you turn loose at the top. You can gain a lot of muscle without doing eccentric reps. In fact, a lot of parts of the body you could gain maximum muscle. So when we talk about eccentrics, they're optional. But are they a useful tool? Yes. Are heavy eccentrics a useful tool? Yeah, they are. There have been studies out there showing that when you're doing eccentrics with a heavier weight than you can do a concentric rep on, they actually produce pretty good muscle growth just by themselves. It's pretty good. And when you think about that from the perspective of a push press, you're using a leg drive to get the weight started, right? And then you lock it out at the top, but your lockout is going to be a heavier weight than you could do with a strict press, right? Right up there where you're working the top where those triceps are really kicking in, you're doing a heavier weight. Now, because you've used leg drive, it's not so big of a deal on the tricep. It's probably not stimulating more growth with a heavier weight because you're using inertia to get it started to help lock it. So you're probably only using the triceps about the same you would on a similar intensity level with a strict press. but the eccentric, the lowering of it. Here's the thing. No one is letting a push press fall at free fall speed. Even a fast eccentric is still an eccentric. You're using, sometimes on a push press for several reps, so you're getting really strong on it, you might be using a heavier weight for 3 reps than you could do for a 1 rep max on a standard overhead press. So when you get to that eccentric portion of the movement, you are doing a heavier eccentric than you would be for every single rep, because even if you're doing a 5 rep set, an 8 rep set, doesn't matter. You're doing a heavier eccentric than you would if you were doing a strict press. All right, so when we know that heavy eccentrics do stimulate pretty reasonable muscle growth when they've been studied in a lab, you're getting a heavy eccentric on every single rep. And the triceps are taking a big brunt of that, as the triceps are really largely involved with the eccentric and slowing that weight down on the way back down. So the push press, if you were to get brutally strong at the push press, would you have well-developed triceps? Yes. Under one condition: your total workload is enough to get them there. Meaning you can get stronger and get a lot of neural efficiency, and you will always gain some size. I mean, if you were to come in and do just a 3 rep set or 2 3-rep sets or 3 rep sets on an exercise, you'll gain strength. You'll gain tons of strength. You will gain decent size too. However, you have a very large neural component to that. Your workload might not be enough to stimulate maximum growth. So if you weren't doing anything else for the triceps, no, you might not maximally develop them. But if workloads get high enough and you start getting up towards, say, 25 reps per week on the push press, all right, 25 reps is generally about what you need to really see really strong muscle growth on any muscle group. Any muscle generally needs around 25 up to about 30 reps per week to start seeing what we would call near maximum growth stimulation on your weekly workloads. So if you ended up doing somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 reps on a heavy push press, considering that it does actually work all 3 long heads, all 3 heads of the tricep, including the long head and that heavy eccentric component, and you were to get brutally strong on it, because again, you need the progressive overload, yes, you absolutely would be able to develop your triceps maximally on that. Your triceps would be well developed, and they would probably be fairly balancedly developed. And of course, most people are going to be doing something else for their triceps. They're going to do some other exercises. I don't care if it's bench press and dips. There's going to be something else in the mix besides just the push press. But the push press would absolutely fill that role for someone if they're willing to do sufficient volume with it every week. And that's the main thing that you need to understand. Gaining maximum size, or close to, because I mean maximum size is hard to pin down. But gaining close to maximum size still requires a certain amount of weekly workload. So again, you would need to do enough volume to make this happen. But it's totally doable. And then you've got a lot of other perks with the push press as well, because the push press works so many other muscles. It builds your whole shoulder girdle up. It's a fantastic core exercise. So it can help develop a tremendously powerful core. But as I've said before, the push press is also a fantastic lower body developer. And not in the traditional sense, and some people would argue with that, but they don't understand that when it comes to force generation, the push press actually even beats the squat when it comes to initial force generation, like a little bit of just that little burst of power. There's been data out there looked at showing the push press even can beat the squat as far as force generation in the thighs. So again, accelerating weight, force, maximum acceleration. So again, that also requires hitting upper threshold muscle fibers. So yeah, the push press even will develop the thighs to some extent. Maybe not as well as a squat will. And no one's arguing that, but it can actually contribute to your overall leg development, lower body development, core development. Your entire shoulder girdle does get worked to some extent on the push press, barring maybe, the rear delts might not get optimal loading. But it's an overall fantastic exercise, and there's a reason the push press is so heavily respected in the actual strength and conditioning world. And it's not always noticed as much by people in certain bro worlds and gym culture. They do overlook it a lot, but inside the strength and conditioning world, any sport to where an athlete needs explosive power and speed and full body power, where they need to hit someone or push someone, the push press is king. It is a highly respected exercise for that. And push press is generally something any serious athlete who needs speed and power is going to do. But in terms of hypertrophy and development, yeah, it can actually add a lot of muscle to different parts of your body. It may not always be the best primary exercise for a lot of those muscles in your body, but it can certainly add secondary fatigue and stimulation to a lot of muscle groups in the body. Just like I was saying, like even your thighs. Would I ever consider it to be the best primary exercise? Of course not. But as a secondary exercise, it can actually add significant amount of additional workload and stimulation to your thighs and lower body as a secondary exercise. Because again, most people out there aren't doing just one exercise for any given muscle or body part. Very rarely is that happening in any endeavor. It doesn't matter what you compete in or what your goals are. Odds are you're not doing that. But as a secondary exercise, it is a tremendous exercise for a lot of parts of the body. But could it be used as a primary tricep builder? Back to the point of this, absolutely. It absolutely could, even though people might not think of it that way. It is. It is an amazing tricep builder if workloads and volume become sufficient for it to do so. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.